If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Casey Anthony series. This is episode 2, Damning Evidence. And we're going to go over the most damning evidence yet against Casey Anthony, as well as continuing issues with Roy Kronk, the meter reader. There's been much speculation regarding Kronk. There's been issues with body recovery, tips, timeline. There's been issues with everything in this case. And it's really weird. It's really weird. And on Mindshock, obviously, our motto is the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. And one I've been using lately, distrust and verify instead of trust and verify. Because how are we going to trust any of these individuals? And not that law enforcement is incompetent or corrupt, but even competent and non-corrupt law enforcement officials make mistakes sometimes. It's possible. That's why so many cases remain unsolved. That's why there's so many wrongful convictions out there. It's really not that shocking. There's a lot of mind-shocking things, but that's not really one of them. And we will be examining a lot of these issues with logic and reason at the forefront, as always. If you enjoy the podcast and you want to support the podcast, donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help us bring more mind-shocking content to you at a faster frequency. We cover a lot of different cases and topics. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. Or you could just go to youtube.com/Mindshock or youtube.com/Mindshock True Crime for exclusive true crime content. If you like this episode, hit the like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast, depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, so first of all, just if you haven't seen episode 1, make sure you check out episode 1. We go through all of the details, all of the available details in the case, discussing numerous theories. Now, the first thing I want to start off with is just basic human psychology. Regardless of who was guilty, so to speak, of the death of Caylee Anthony, whether it was Casey, whether it was one of the grandparents, whoever's liable, just basic human psychology, how many people have the integrity or character to own up to it, and what would the brain naturally gravitate towards? Okay, Kaylee's dead anyway. This is a horrible tragedy. Now, nothing's going to bring her back. So what would the average individual do? Because we have a spectrum of humans out there. Some humans, they would take the fall if they were really guilty. Other humans would run. Other humans would try to make it look like something else as to not be negligible themselves or found guilty themselves and have their freedom put at risk, because again, what is their brain telling them? Nothing's going to bring Caylee back, so maybe kind of get rid of the body, make it look like something happened, something ambiguous and vague and unprovable. That way they don't go to jail, and she's dead anyway. And would the human mind try to justify it as it's not as if they killed her on purpose? Unless they did, but there's no evidence of that. So if it's just an accident and their brain is trying to justify it in some kind of fashion, is that what a large percentage of the population would do? And we really don't have those numbers. I mean, how are we supposed to do an honest study? Because that means these individuals that have done something like this would be found out. So we really don't have a true control or baseline. We don't really have a baseline here on what percentage of the population would try to get rid of a body of an accident. Now, and compare it to, for example, a murderer who killed someone on purpose or someone trying to cover for someone else. We really don't have these numbers. What percentage of population would do this or that? Okay, and now we're dealing with this situation with Casey Anthony and her grandparents. So I will start with this. This is an NBCnews.com article. Casey Anthony breaks her silence about case acquittal and life. Discussing her daughter's last moments, the 30-year-old spoke in halting, sober tones. I'm still not even certain about what happened. And that's interesting phrasing, is it not? So this was published March 17th, 2017 by the Associated Press. West Palm Beach, Florida. Casey Anthony knows that much of the world believes she killed her 2-year-old daughter, despite her acquittal. But 9 years later, she insists she didn't know how the last hours of Kaylee's life unfolded. Kaylee would be 12 right now, and would be a total badass, she told the Associated Press in one of a series of exclusive interviews. I'd like to think she'd be listening to classic rock, playing sports, and putting up with no nonsense. But discussing Kaylee's last moments, the 30-year-old Anthony spoke in halting, sober tones. I'm still not even certain as I stand here today about what happened, she said. Based off what was in the media, the story of a woman who could not account for a month in which her child was missing, whose defense involved an accidental drowning for which there was no eyewitness testimony. I understand the reasons people feel about me. I understand why people have the opinions they do. This was the first time Anthony spoke to a news media outlet about her daughter's death or her years since the trial. Her responses were at turns revealing, bizarre, and often contradictory, and they ultimately raised more questions than answers about the case that has captivated the nation. It's been almost 9 years since Kaylee went missing and 6 since the circus-like Orlando trial that ended in her mother's acquittal. The trial was carried live on cable news networks and was the focus of daily commentaries by HLN's Nancy Grace, who called her the most hated mom in America and derisively tot mom. People found me guilty long before I had my day in court, Anthony said. The child was supposedly last seen on June 16, 2008. She was first reported missing by Casey Anthony's mother on July 15th. A day later, Casey Anthony was arrested on charges of child neglect. She told police that Kaylee had disappeared with a babysitter, and that's a whole nother saga that, of course, we went over on the previous podcast. A utility worker working in a wooded area near the Anthony home on December 11th found skeletal remains that were later determined to be Kaylee's. Experts would testify that air samples indicated that decaying human remains had been present in Casey Anthony's trunk. And of course, there's a bunch of dispute about that as well. In the end, prosecutors proved Casey Anthony was a liar, but convinced the jury of little else. And just another side note there are people that are just habitual liars, pathological liars, just mentally unhinged people who lie a lot. So obviously some of them commit crimes, some of them don't. So the fact that someone is a liar, again, that doesn't really tell us a lot of information if we're looking at it objectively. Because if she's a liar, she'd be lying about things anyway, regardless of whether Kaylee Anthony was still alive or not. So being a liar doesn't mean you're also guilty of other crimes. It means you're guilty of being a liar. The government failed to establish how Kaylee died, and they couldn't find her mother's DNA on the duct tape they said was used to suffocate her. After a trial of a month and a half, the jury took less than 11 hours to find Anthony not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse. Still, the Florida Department of Children and Families concluded that Anthony was responsible for her daughter's death because her actions, or the lack of actions, ultimately resulted or contributed in the death of a child. And that, I believe, is indisputable. Is anybody disputing that? Now, again, unless you think there was some strange situation with the grandparents where, I don't know. Again, there's a lot of different theories out there, but just on the surface, it seems, even if she didn't intentionally murder her child, she's obviously guilty if her child is dead. Unless you can, what is the situation there? And of course, if this was all designed by some party, possibly not even Casey Anthony, if Casey Anthony, let's say she was guilty, but another party might have made it to look like some kind of a kidnapping, staged kidnapping to protect Casey Anthony, with or without her knowledge. Again, if this is Mindshock, we're looking at all possible theories here. Continue on with the article here. And just this month, former circuit judge Belvin Perry Jr., who resided at the trial, theorized that Anthony may have killed Kaylee accidentally when she was using chloroform to calm her. She was convicted of 4 counts of lying to police, though 2 counts were later dropped, and served about 3 years in prison while awaiting trial. 1,000 people were there to see her released. She admits that she lied to the police about being employed at Universal Studios, about leaving Kaylee with a babysitter, about telling 2 people, both of them imaginary, that Kaylee was missing, about receiving a phone call from Kaylee the day before she was reported missing. Even if I would have told them everything that I told to the psychologist, I hate to say this, but I firmly believe I would have been in the same place. Because cops believe other cops tend to victimize the victims. I understand now. I see why I was treated the way I was, even had I been completely truthful. That's an interesting statement there as well. She added, cops lie to people every day. I'm just one of the unfortunate idiots who admitted they lied. Another interesting statement. She paused. My dad was a cop. You can read into that what you want to. At the trial, lead defense attorney Jose Baez suggested that the little girl drowned and that Casey Anthony's father, George, helped cover that up and sexually abused his daughter. Her father has vehemently denied the accusations. And I will take this moment yet again to advocate for brain fingerprint scans, because this will tell us exactly what did or didn't happen. Because brain fingerprint scanning, of course, bypasses whether someone is trying to deceive or not. It only measures the recognition response in the brain, whether information is recognized or not. So if there was some kind of accidental drowning, there wasn't. There was the chloroform situation. If all of these individuals would subject to a brain fingerprint scan test, we would have a lot of information. Even if we don't have the truth, we would at least be able to rule out all these other scenarios, which would be very helpful. But most likely it would lead us to the truth. Anthony doesn't talk about her parents much, other than to say she was disappointed when they took money from television's Dr. Phil and appeared on his show. The host donated $600,000 to Kaylee's Fund, a nonprofit started by Anthony's parents. At the time, he said George and Cindy Anthony would derive no income from the money. The nonprofit was later dissolved, and I'm wondering if any accountants have managed to document that entire process and exactly where the money went. Asked about the drowning defense, Casey Anthony hesitated. Everyone has their theories. I don't know. As I stand here today, I can't tell you one way or another. The last time I saw my daughter, I believed she was alive and was going to be okay, and that's what was told to me. Now, here's the thing, though. Okay, a lot of this doesn't make sense, and a lot of these responses don't make sense, because if Casey really does believe her parents were responsible for Kaylee's death, would she be saying that? I mean, that was what the attorney outlined, but you don't, apparently she had the opportunity here to say, yeah, I think it was them, and that's why this all came out this way. Unless, I mean, is it possible there was some situation where the 3 of them are all guilty in some capacity? And that's why they don't want to make so many direct statements? I don't know. A lot of this is really, really bizarre. I mean, everything down to Kronk, which we'll be getting to in a moment, because even the entire meter reader's timeline, the police searching the area, not finding anything, then finding the body later. I mean, this is weird. This is weird. The coincidence theorists that pretend that that all these coincidences, anomalies, unexplained oddities are just completely normal and don't affect anything. It's just really bizarre. There's something weird going on beyond Casey Anthony and the grandparents. And I don't know what that is. And I'm not saying that means any of them are innocent. The three of them could theoretically all be guilty as well if they all knew to some capacity what was going on. I mean, was there some kind of a fight over who was going to be taking care of Kaylee at certain times and that spilled over into something else? I mean, who knows? But obviously the three of them, I mean, supposedly obvious, they would feel guilty about what happened even if they weren't the one that caused it. So would they point the finger at one another directly, even if they suspected that was what actually happened? I don't know. That's a very good question. Anthony lives in the South Florida home of Patrick McKenna, a private investigator who is the lead investigator on her defense team. She also works for him doing online social media searches and other investigative work. McKenna was also the lead investigator for O.J. Simpson when he was accused of killing his wife and acquitted. The coincidence stack is going up here. Anthony said she's become fascinated with the case, and there are a lot of parallels to her own circumstances. So the lead investigator in the O.J. case and in the Casey Anthony case was the same guy. I can empathize with his situation, she said. I mean, is she referring to O.J. Simpson here? That's weird. Huh. Very interesting. She still dreads the supermarket checkout line for fear she'll see photos of her daughter on the cover of tabloid newspapers. And just a quick point on the O.J. Simpson case, if you haven't checked that O.J. Simpson's case coverage on the Mindshock podcast out there, we have gone over every single theory, and that's an ongoing series as well. There'll be a follow-up episode shortly in the O.J. Simpson series. She still dreads the supermarket checkout line for fears she'll see photos of her daughter on the cover of tabloid papers. Her bedroom walls are decorated with photos of Kaylee, and she weeps when she shows off her daughter's colorful finger-painted artwork. Still, she asserts she is happy. For her 31st birthday, she plans to go skydiving. She enjoys taking photos, mostly of squirrels and other wildlife, and she loves her investigative work. Anthony speaks of her pariah status. I don't give an expletive about what anyone thinks about me. I never will, she said. I'm okay with myself. I sleep pretty good at night. And that's an interesting statement to close out that interview. She says she sleeps pretty well. Would an innocent person say that? Would a guilty person say that? Would an innocent person that's fed up with all the BS say that? I don't know. I really don't know. That is very, very strange. Now, even an innocent person, would an innocent person sleep well at night? I think she'd have to be innocent and disturbed to sleep well at night. I mean, how many parents sleep well? I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. There's no appropriate answer for grieving. I mean, I would think that's something that never goes away, unfortunately. So yeah, it's really bizarre. It's very, very bizarre. And a lot of things in this case don't add up. One of which, of course, is Roy Kronk. I'm going to go over another interview here. So the official story, of course, is that Kronk called in a tip. Now, here's an article from abcnews.com by Lee Farron, published January 13th, 2009. Meter reader Roy Kronk denies tip to Kaylee's body. And the plot thickens. Roy Kronk, the utility worker who found Kaylee Anthony's remains, dismissed suggestions that he was somehow involved in the Florida toddler's disappearance in an exclusive interview with Good Morning America Today. No good deed goes unpunished, he said. There's all the speculation that there were tips. Nobody tipped me off. I figured this out by myself. I've never even met those people. The Anthony family. Casey Anthony, Kaylee's mother, reported the 2-year-old missing in July, a month after she disappeared. Anthony was charged with the toddler's murder in October. Kronk discovered Kaylee's remains in December, but had suspicions about the location months before. He alerted police to his suspicions in August and met cops at the site. But he also warned the police that the area was infested with rattlesnakes and even showed police photos of the rattlers. I mean, that's an interesting thing. Did we go? I don't think we went over that extensively in the first podcast, if at all. So it's like, oh, the body's there, but there's a bunch of rattlesnakes, so you can't search? I mean, is that how that went down? Because apparently they did search, though. Kronk complained to GMA, however, Good Morning America, however, that investigators made a very quick search of the area and left. Kronk, a former bail bondsman who was aware of the search for the missing toddler, said that in mid-August he was taking a break from work in the Orlando suburb less than a mile from the Anthony home when he realized the road he was on did not normally see heavy foot traffic. It made sense to me, he said, if you were going to get rid of something like that, the decay of the swamp on either side of the road, it would be a good place to hide it. After a little exploring, Kronk said he saw a suspicious bag in a wooded, watery area just off the road. Kronk made a total of 3 calls to authorities. But when a detective met Kronk to investigate further, Kronk said the effort was frustratingly cursory. He went to the water's edge. I pointed to where it was at. He just swept his head back and forth and said, I don't see anything. And pretty much that was it. I guess the deputy didn't want to go in the water to look at the bag, Kronk said. The cop was, I would say, he was kind of rude to me. Kronk conceded that his warning that the area was infested with snakes could have hindered the investigators' search. Okay, I'm still not following. They have zero technology to search an area with snakes. They have no animal handler. There's nothing being dedicated to this search. I mean, is this how law enforcement performs searches in this area? It just doesn't make any sense. If you're looking for a body, you don't say, oh, there's an animal here, or there's a snake here. I guess we won't search there. I guess we'll never know. We'll never know if it's there or not because we're too scared to search. And we're not going to bring in the proper individuals, trained experts, or technology required to do a proper search. Does this make sense to anybody? Am I the only one that thinks this is strange? I mean, this is just downright mind-shocking. It's just, how can this be explained? Even if and it took 3 calls to get them out there. How many times is he going to call that this place should be searched, and it's very close to the Anthony home? It's just really weird. It's really weird. In December, police confirmed they had searched the area in August, but the search was hindered because the area was underwater at the time. Okay, again, so are they stating they came back and searched separately, or are they calling this one officer just swiveling his head for 2 seconds and saying that was a legitimate search? Are they saying that was the search? And they didn't feel like searching the water? I mean, water searches are part of every single search and rescue or body recovery. You don't just not search water because it's water. I mean, there are tools and technologies that have been used to search water for many, many decades. This is, I mean, does this make sense to anybody? I don't understand how they were just excusing not searching. It just doesn't make any sense. This is Florida. I mean, it's not like some area in northern Canada that's covered by 10 feet of snow that's a little bit harder to search. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Kronk said that he returned to the area in December because he had to relieve himself, and that is when he found the bag that had Kaylee's remains inside. By then, much of the water had dried up, he said. Since the discovery, Kronk said he's been the target of harsh, unfair accusations. This is kind of okay, so this is still weird. So he went there however many times. He called the police 3 times to get them to search in August, and then absolutely nothing happens until December. So Kronk is just sitting around September, October, November, no problem. Then it just strikes him in December that he has to go find the remains. I don't know. Again, Kronk is one of these individuals that needs to be subjected to a brain fingerprint scan because none of this makes any sense. He just randomly went there one day in December and then actually discovered the remains. So he's a bail bondsman, not a search and rescue expert. It's weird. He's a meter reader and former bail bondsman. So how many underwater searches or search and rescue teams is it beyond? Maybe he volunteered for some, who knows, but It's just weird. It's weird. Since the discovery, Kronk said he's been the target of harsh, unfair accusations. They've been really hard on me, he said. You try to do the right thing, you try to be a nice guy, and you just get vilified. I mean, the sad thing is people believe some of the things that are being said. And I have nothing to do with this at all. I tried to help put a little closure to that poor child. And she got a decent burial at the end of all this. That's what I tried to do, Kronk said. And that's a fair point, because if he really was guilty, why would he be going back to the area in December to find the body? I'm not alleging that he's guilty of anything that happened to her. I'm saying that none of the search makes sense. So I'm not saying what he's saying is not true. If he's just a good Samaritan that noticed that that area would be very good to dump a body, but the police response doesn't make any sense. The timeline doesn't make any sense. So it's just weird. End to the long twisting search for Kaylee. According to police, Kronk is not suspected of being involved in Kaylee's disappearance. He saw something that was suspicious and acted upon it as any good citizen should. He did the right thing, Orange County Sheriff's Department spokesman Carlos Padilla said in a statement. So wait a second. Carlos Padilla is saying you call the police, if they're too lazy to search, lazy and or incompetent, then you do the search yourself, possibly compromising valuable evidence in a possible murder investigation. That's considered the right thing. Man, Orange County, Florida is a weird county. Okay, Kronk's discovery ended a massive search effort that began July 15th when Casey Anthony told police her daughter Kaylee had disappeared a month earlier. The day after she reported the child missing, Anthony was arrested on charges including child neglect. During a bond hearing July 22nd, authorities named Anthony a person of interest in Kaylee's disappearance and said they were treating the case as a potential homicide after they discovered evidence of decomposition in the trunk of a car that Anthony had driven. And again, did we ever firmly establish who else had access to her car? Boyfriend, ex-boyfriend? Okay, October 14th, with Kaylee's body still missing, Anthony was officially charged with first-degree murder. By the time Kronk found the child's remains less than half a mile from the Anthony home, less than half a mile, not even a mile, less than half a mile from the Anthony home December 11th, the massive search effort had attracted thousands of volunteers. Authorities, including the FBI, had tracked down hundreds of leads both in the U.S. and abroad. And yet they couldn't search underwater or in an area with rattlesnakes? Weird. 8 days later, authorities confirmed through DNA testing that the remains belonged to the missing toddler. It has been the defense's position throughout the search that Anthony handed Kaylee up to a third party in June and that a body could be found. Todd Black, spokesman for Anthony's attorney, Jose Baez, told ABC News after the remains were found in December. And let me read that again. It has been the defense's position throughout the search that Anthony handed Kaylee up to a third party in June and that a body could be found. Handed Kaylee up to a third party, like her grandparents? I mean, that's kind of a weird. Okay. From the beginning, Baez started preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best, Black said. Anthony claimed a woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, who was Kaylee's nanny, was the last person to see Kaylee alive after Anthony dropped Kaylee off at her apartment. After an extensive search for Fernandez Gonzalez, one woman came forward to deny any involvement in the case or any connection with the family at all. Police cleared Fernandez Gonzalez, 37, and the woman filed a defamation lawsuit against Anthony in September, claiming she lost her job and cannot find an apartment because of her inclusion in the investigation. And if that's true, that's pretty messed up. Okay, so are we ready to get to the smoking gun evidence, potential smoking gun evidence? Now, this is a very weird Angel Fire website, so again, I am not alleging any of this is true or untrue. They're talking about some kind of a surveillance system here, and I don't know if this is some kind of theoretical presentation, but it is interesting, and if it accidentally describes the actual scenario, then that is very interesting. Again, I am not alleging any of this is true or untrue. Here's the first scenario. June 2008, Hope Springs Drive, Orlando, Florida. A 2-year-old child is reported missing by her grandmother. Her name is Kaylee Anthony. I will not cover all the details and try to get how drones could have solved this case within hours, not the almost 5 months it took. The police arrived at the Anthony home. Kaylee lived there with her mother, Casey Anthony, and grandmother and grandfather. The grandmother told police the child had not been seen for a week since Father's Day, June 15th. That day, the grandmother and grandfather were not home all day. They said they left the house at noon and arrived home at 6 p.m. The mother, Casey, told the story a babysitter had taken the girl, and the reason she did not tell her parents was she did not want to get them involved because she was handling the situation on her own. The officers taking the report sensed something was not right and called in the drone surveillance team. This team controls surveillance of the entire city of Orlando from a drone flying at 35,000 feet 24 hours a day. It has night vision capability as well as auto track, which can track an object, vehicle, or person. Once the drone team collected testimony of activity in the area around the Anthony home on June 15th, the last time Kaylee was seen, they accessed the captured video and images from June 15th. Casey's car was seen pulling into the garage from being parked in the driveway, then out of the garage at 4:30 p.m. Her car was distinctive as it had a black bra or stone guard across the entire front and was easily differentiated from other cars. The drone team activated the auto track on Kaylee's car and followed it continuously in fast forward. They saw her stop and go into a store and then drive to an apartment, leave the car, then go inside. She did not come out until the next morning. Her car was tracked in fast forward time for the next 6 days to various locations around the city of Orlando and seen driving around nightclubs, stores, and different apartments. She only went home once during that time, where the drone team would stop video and identify locations and addresses of any stop she made. On the evening of the 6th day, they saw the car pull up off the road near a wooded plot very close to the Anthony home. Casey was seen going to the trunk and removing what appeared to be a black garbage bag, and she then entered the wooded area. She was seen exiting that area in 5 minutes, getting back into her car and driving to an apartment, which was later identified as belonging to one of her many boyfriends. The drone team notified Orlando police and they went to the area of the woods and commenced a search. It took them 20 minutes to find a black trash bag in which they found the body of a small child. It was identified as Kaylee Anthony. This scenario shows how drones can assist police, and the evidence would surely have convicted Casey Anthony. So supposedly this is some kind of theoretical, they're already using drones, etc. Now, I've mentioned that spy satellite systems and or high altitude planes already have 24-hour surveillance on pretty much every metropolitan area in the world, or at the very least in so-called first world countries. So this technology already exists. I've brought it up many times, and I believe it can be used to, even just Google Earth, whenever they do the images, that has shown certain vehicles and certain driveways on certain days, which is very interesting. We've gone over this even in the Stephen Avery case. It's very, very interesting. Now, in this scenario, they even provide an image here. Is that the car at the scene where Kaylee's body was found? So, assuming all of this is generated and not real imagery, is this the kind of damning evidence that would have convicted her? Because if that really is her car, or a car that just happens to be identical to hers, this is very close. It's really interesting. Supposedly this is less than 1,800 feet from the home. And again, this Kronk individual believed he saw a bag, so that story doesn't make any sense either. But in this scenario, is it possible there is some kind of a high-altitude plane or satellite surveillance of this neighborhood that would yield the clues required? Now, if these systems are all top secret, this is all NSA, could they provide the evidence regardless? It's really interesting, very frustrating as well in a lot of these cases, because it really seems that technology and the information is there to solve a lot of these cases, and they just refuse to use it. It's really bizarre. It's just really, really bizarre. But this scenario has the date being June 27th, 2008, with this vehicle parked in that area. But it's really, really mind shocking. It's really mind shocking. And this case, I still believe that boyfriends, ex boyfriends should have all been brain fingerprint scanned, as well as the grandparents, as well as Casey Anthony. That would give us all the information we need to solve this case, in my opinion, instead of having all of these loose ends where you can't definitively prove scenario A, scenario B. Did Casey Anthony actually want to kill her child, or was this accidental in some capacity, and were the grandparents involved in some capacity? I mean, there are things that don't make sense across the board in this case. I've gone over a lot of them in the first episode. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you check that out. I don't believe this is just a quick open and shut case like a lot of people believe. There's a couple different scenarios, and the guilty parties, of course, need to be held accountable. Because even if it was accidental, some kind of staging with a duct tape to make it look like some kind of kidnapping gone wrong, I mean, obviously that's a crime as well. So there's a lot of crimes that need to be prosecuted here. It's not just whatever happened initially. It's what happened afterwards with all the staging and the cover-up. It's just really bizarre. I mean, everything with the autopsies not making sense. I went over all that in the first episode. This is not an open and shut case, as many believed, including myself. I mean, before I actually did the deep dive, I didn't know there were that many issues with this case. But hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the Mindshock podcast in the Casey Anthony series. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this podcast, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.